What is up, guys? We are back again with another video, okay? And in today's video, we're going to go through setting up the diet. So if you watched the last video on goal setting, this is essentially a follow-on from that, where we are going to dive a little bit deeper into how I have set up my diet and how I'm going to adjust that over time to pay respects to my overall goals, right? So if you remember from the last video, my goals are, I want to lose a little bit of body fat, or rather, that's where I started. I wanted to lose a little bit of body fat, and then I wanted to kind of really push the performance side of things and obviously keep my overall goal of health at the forefront, right? So that's what we're going to get into today. We are going to get going with setting up the diet. So when I came back from America, right, I was roughly the kind of 95 to 97 kilos. Around that kind of weight, okay? So that's what I'm going to put in here, or rather that's what I did put in here, 95 kilos, right? And I'm 195 centimeters tall, 27 years old. And then my activity level, because we need to have an activity multiplier to take into account all NEAT and, you know, how active you are, all that kind of stuff. I'm going to put mine at roughly, or rather I did put mine at roughly 1.5, because, you know, I basically have a sedentary lifestyle. I work at a computer, I go to college, which again is mostly sitting, and although I do train twice a day, 4 days per week, my overall activity isn't actually that high, right? So I'm somewhere in that 1.5 to 1.6 range, right? Enter in all my information and it'll give me a maintenance calorie. It'll give me my BMR, but for this discussion, the maintenance figure is more appropriate for what we want. If I could not do that, that'd be great. So the maintenance figure is more appropriate for what we want with this. Now, this calculator, it's available on site. You don't have to sign up or anything. You can just literally download it. The link is in the description below, right? Now, the only thing I've added to this is goal and calorie adjustment, right? So I need to enter in a figure here, right? Using this figure, right? And what I wanted to do to start out, I wanted to lose the weight or lose the fat relatively quickly and then get to a more sustainable fat loss pace, right? And then I'd set myself up to succeed in both the sport I want to do and then obviously enjoy, you know, health benefits and everything from the diet, etc., right? So for me, if we have a maintenance of, we'll call it 3,250, I wanted to start off in a relatively fast deficit, you know, a relatively big deficit. So I took away 500 calories and that puts me at 2,750, right? Now we'll come back to the macro breakdown in a second, but just to put things in a little bit more perspective and then again, talk about how you actually respect your long-term goals and what you're trying to achieve, right? I could have started in, we'll say, a roughly 250, 300 calorie deficit of 3,000, right? Or sorry, yeah, 3,000 calories as my calorie goal, right? And that would have been perfectly fine. I still would have lost some weight at that level. However, now this is the thing where everyone as a dieter, you need to keep in mind. The calories that you start at, even if it is a deficit, that doesn't mean that deficit is the same all the time, right? And what I mean by that is your body weight is going to be adjusting. And if you remember here, this is all based off what weight you are, right? That Harris-Benedict formula, while it does account for, you know, male-female variations, the majority of the extrapolations are coming from your weight and your activity multiplier, right? So if my activity has stayed the same, but my weight has changed, this is going to change all of these figures. Now, again, this is where I started, 95 kilos. That was the starting point, 95, 97, that kind of range. That was the starting point. Right now, I'm at about 92, right? So for the last while, 2,750 calories has been working perfectly, right? However, now I've noticed that the scales weight is it's dropping slower than it had been dropping, right? So I'm now 92. So let's put that in here. We're 92. So everything else stayed the same. Activity level, you know, height hasn't changed, I hope. Age hasn't changed. Well, obviously it has, but it doesn't really make a difference. But the thing that has changed now is my maintenance, right? Same as my BMR has changed, but my maintenance calories have changed now, right? So what did start as a 500 calorie deficit is now only a 400 calorie deficit or thereabouts, right? So I've moved from being in a big deficit closer to being in a regular deficit that we'd recommend of that kind of 300, right? Now, again, if I got down to, which is roughly the goal of 90 kilos, right? Again, it drops a little bit further again, right? So the deficit gets smaller. But again, you can see how this changes over time, and it accounts for a lot of what people are experiencing when they say, oh, dieting makes my metabolism slow down, or, you know, my metabolism is slow. And again, this is true, but it's because the diet is a response to the weight, how much you weigh, you know, it's a response to all the stuff that you are doing. It's not a static number that stays the same irregardless of what you do. It is something that changes over time, and it is something that you must adjust over time, right? So again, I'm still saying at the 2750 calories. However, the magnitude of a deficit is now reduced. Now, there are stuff that goes on under the hood, and we've written articles about that as well, you know, that do kind of change your metabolism, your overall metabolic rate. Like, you get down regulation of like non-exercise thermogenesis and stuff like that. So, you know, the NEAT, the fidgeting and stuff, that kind of goes down in response to calorie deprivation. So that obviously all plays into it. But this is, again, these are all rough and ready figures, and you just have to adjust based on what you're seeing on the scale itself, right? So 2750. We understand that that's changing over time, and we understand, I'm just going to change that back to 92, right? So we understand that that's changing over time, and that calories are adjusting over time, and you must be aware of this. This doesn't mean that you have to change your calories every week or every day or anything like that, but it does mean that you have to be aware that, you know, some slowing down of the weight loss is going to occur, and there's no real two ways around that, right? The next thing then you need to do is set up your overall macronutrient split. Now, I'm not really a fan of percentages unless you use them based on other figures, right? Percentages are really easy. This is why they're on this calculator, because especially if you're using like something like MyFitnessPal and you're not paying for the premium account, you know, you are going to have to set things based on a percentage, right? But the percentage you choose should be based on actual, we'll say, grams per kilogram figures, right? Now, for me, protein wise, I like somewhere in the range of 2 to 2.5 grams per kg, right? And again, we'll say, just to make these figures a little bit easier to kind of understand, we'll just say I'm 100 kilos, right? So that means that I'm somewhere in around 200 to 250 grams of protein per day, right? And I personally, I get hungrier if I don't have a higher protein intake, and it makes it harder for me personally to stick to my diet. So I always tend to, even if I'm gaining, even if I am dieting, I tend to stay closer to that top end of the range. Now, you could say the top end is somewhere around 3. You could even argue that it's somewhere around 4. But for most people, 2 to 2.5 is a good place to be at, right? So for me, I'm going to say 35%, because if I could say somewhere, I could even say 30%, you know, that still puts me here roughly in the ballpark, right? So I always set protein first. I know I like a higher intake. 240, that's roughly where I feel like I'm getting all the benefits of protein in terms of muscle protein synthesis, but then also in terms of the satiety aspect, right? You can set your individual figures at a different rate, as long as you're staying somewhere in that range. We'll even drop it down to 1.8 to 2.5, somewhere in that range, you're pretty good to go, right? It makes more sense to have higher if you're dieting, and it makes potentially more sense to have lower if you are gaining. But again, we've discussed this on site. We don't need to go into all the nuances of it here, right? The next thing then is not carbs, it's fats. Generally, we like somewhere in the range of 0.6 to 1 gram per kg, right? So again, I could put this at, we'll say 25. Still makes sense. I could even put it down. I think I can put it down as far as I can put it down as far as 20%, you know, but personally, I enjoy a higher fat intake. So I'm going to put that roughly 30. You know, I like to have roughly a gram per kg. Again, satiety, it makes me feel fuller for longer. And it also kind of keeps my energy more stable throughout the day. Plus, I just tend to enjoy fattier cuts of meat, and I eat a lot of fish as well. So those two things kind of add up so that my fat intake is always slightly on that higher side. So it makes sense for me to set it at roughly a gram per kg. And then whatever is left, so we go 30 and 35, you know, the only thing that's left is 35%. That's what we set for carbs. Now you could argue, for me personally, based on the two activities that I'm doing, you know, which is resistance training and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, that a higher carb intake makes sense. But given the fact that I'm not really in such a huge energy deficit that I'm only on like 100 grams of carbs or anything, that, you know, 250, that as long as I ensure that I'm timing it in a sensible way, you know, I'm never going to be really in an issue where, you know, I don't have enough glycogen or I don't have enough circulating sugars that I'm going to feel like I'm in an energy deficit, you know? So for me, 250, 240, that's perfect. That's good to go. So that's how I would set up my figures initially. Then we have to also then pay respect to fiber, which this calculates it just automatically based on roughly, you know, 15 grams per 1,000 calories. You know, you could say it's 10 to 15 grams, somewhere in that range. You should still have some sort of fiber goal, at least in my opinion, at least in our opinion, because it then generally helps you stay on track with actually eating vegetables and eating, you know, micronutrient rich foods, right? So 10 to 15, anywhere in that range, you're pretty good to go. Some people like higher, some people like lower, but you know, that's a good starting point. So for me, again, that's roughly, I have it set at 35 to 50. As long as I get that, we're perfect. We're good to go with that. So that's how I'm setting up my overall diet. And then again, that's how I'm trying to stay on track with my diet so that I respect the fact that I want to be healthy long term. So I want to improve my body composition, both from an aesthetic point of view. You know, I like being that little bit leaner. And then also, I don't want to have excess amounts of body fat as I age, because again, there's negative health consequences with that, especially if you are slowly gaining more body fat as you age, you know? So I need to pay respect to that. So my calories have to be on point. And then obviously I have to eat a macronutrient specific diet that pays respect to my overall goals, my overall goal of, you know, building some muscle, you know, losing some fat, you know, getting good at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and then also, you know, being healthful. That's what I want to be healthy. I want to enjoy life, you know, so it has to pay respect to that. Now, I don't want this video to be like, this is exactly how you have to set your overall calories, how exactly you set your overall macronutrients. This is always a starting point. Like I said, you know, at the start when I was 95 and now I'm 92. That changes, yes, your calories, but stuff like that also then changes your macronutrients. So again, if I lost 15 kg, we'll just say, absolutely shredded, right? You know, my protein requirements are going to be different. My fat requirements are going to be different. My carb requirements are going to be different, you know? But also then, on top of that, preferences play into this. Like you saw when I was talking about this, like I was talking about my preferences. You know, I was talking about how the diet actually makes me feel, how different macronutrient ratios and stuff make me feel. So you have to factor all of that stuff in as you're making these choices, which is hard to do if you're just starting out. So this is what I say to everyone who's doing this kind of stuff for the first time. You just need to set numbers. Don't get this paralysis by analysis. Just set some numbers based on what I've said, based on the article that's linked below, and then go from there. You know, so if you set the numbers, you go, this makes sense from what they're saying I should be at, you know, because everyone will be like, oh, that's too many calories, or that's too few calories. Everyone has all of these things, but set it at that. See how your body adjusts to that. See how you know, actually progress from that, or digress, or like if you get worse, okay, you know, that's an information point, you know. But if you're like, okay, now I'm actually seeing progress because I set my diet correctly, then you can adjust from there, whether that means changing your calories, whether that means changing your macronutrient ratios, and essentially over time you build a diet that is respecting the science but also respecting you as an individual, right? So that's today's video. It's pretty quick, setting up the diet. So setting up the diet to pay respect to my overall goals of health, muscle building, fat loss, and then obviously the performance side of things as well. So bookmark this video because we will be coming back to this when I start transitioning my diet, and you can see how I'll make changes over time. Anyway guys, like, comment, subscribe, all of that fun stuff, and enjoy yourself.